Good afternoon, dear students, and everyone who is listening to me today. I'm Shafiqa Jafarova, and I'm going to present you today the lecture in Veterinary Anatomy of Domestic Animals. Today, the topic of today's lecture is endocrine glands. Before starting the lecture, I'd like to remind you that because of condition today in the world and in our country, because of COVID-19 infection, we have to stay at home and prevent the spread of this disease and protect our families, our students. And because of that, our university has organized these online lectures. And so today I'm going to present you the online lecture in veterinary anatomy. This lecture is for students of the first grade, the students of the veterinary faculty, English group, but I think that this lecture will be very useful and will be very interesting for every veterinary student, for vets, and for everyone who is studying in the field of medicine. So please feel absolutely free to write in the comments any questions, and I will be very glad to answer your questions. So let's start our lecture. So as I said, the topic in the veterinary anatomy, the topic of this lecture is endocrine glands. You know that the main language of anatomy is Latin, so I'm going to give you some terminology in Latin too. So endocrine glands in Latin will be glandulae endocrinae. Here you can see the plan of our lecture. I'm going today to explain you the definition of endocrine glands. Then I'm going to explain you the structure and the functions of pituitary gland, pineal gland, thyroid gland, then parathyroid glands, adrenal gland, so gonads as endocrine organs, pancreas, and hormones which these organs secrete and produce. Here you can see the textbook and materials which I used for preparing the lecture, and so you can see here the list of books, and the first book is very useful for students. I recommend this book for all my students. So first of all, what is the gland? Gland is any organ which produce some substances into the body of the animal. So there are lots of classifications of endocrine glands. So based on the morphology of the gland, besides based on the secrete mode, based on the substances which they release. But here I'd like to show you the classification just based on the type of the gland, the most basic classification. Here we can see the exocrine gland and endocrine gland. First of all, I'd like to explain you what is the difference between the endocrine gland and between the exocrine glands. First of all, remember that the endocrine glands is a gland which is ductless. There is no duct in these glands, and the substances which is produced by the glandular cells are absorbed into the bloodstream, directly into the bloodstream, into the circulatory system, and there is no ducts. While if we look at the structure of the exocrine glands, we can see that here these glands have ducts, and they produce their substances on the surface of the organ, on the surface of the skin, for example, on the surface of the oral cavity. So here the main differences. And remember, please, that the name of the substances which is produced by the endocrine glands is hormones. So if we talk about hormones, you should understand that we talk about substances which is produced by the endocrine glands. Here you can see illustrations of a cat and dog, and here you can see examples of endocrine glands. So as I mentioned earlier, we have animals and as well as humans, they have such endocrine glands like adrenal gland, thyroid, parathyroid, pituitary gland, and so on. Endocrine system is very important in animal agriculture because the endocrine system has influence on the function of all organs, and so it's important in the growth of animal, in the development of the muscles, besides in the dairy production, in the reproduction of animals. So I think that all veterinary students should have a deep knowledge in this field. More information about the hormones. Hormones can be produced not only by the endocrine glands. Hormones can be produced also by parenchymal cells and by the aggregates. When we talk about parenchymal cells, we should remember that these cells are single cells. And for example, there can be cells which are scattered throughout the body. For example, we can talk about the apoptotic cells which are found in the gastrointestinal wall. Then there are aggregations of cells. An example of aggregation of cells is Leydig cells, or for example, there can be Langerhans cells. Langerhans cells are the aggregations of cells which are found in the pancreas, while the Leydig cells are the aggregation of cells which are found in the testes. So this illustration can show you that hormones are produced not only by organs, but also by the single cells and by the group of cells which found in different organs. I'd like first to start with pituitary gland. Why pituitary gland? Because pituitary gland is master endocrine gland, and generally in science this gland is called master gland. Pituitary gland in Latin is also called hypophysis and also called glandula pituitaria. Where is pituitary gland located? Pituitary gland is found in the brain. In the brain of animals there is sphenoid bone, and sphenoid bone is one of the bones which locate at the base of the cranium and is called os sphenoidale. You can see this bone here, os sphenoidale. Os sphenoidale had the structure which is called sella turcica. In this fossa, the pituitary gland is located. Besides, there are some very important anatomical structures which surround the pituitary gland. There is hypothalamus, which locates a little bit dorsally. There's optic chiasma, there's mammillary glands, and beside there is dorsum cella, which locates caudally of the sella turcica. There is tuberculum cella, which locates cranially. Moreover, the pituitary gland is surrounded by meninges. The dura mater, which locates just near the pituitary gland, form the diaphragm for this gland, and there's cavernous sinus, very prominent cavernous sinus of the brain, which locates just near the pituitary gland. What else about the pituitary gland? Remember that this gland relates to the brain. It is a part of the encephalon, together with hypothalamus and with pineal gland. As I said, this gland is called master gland. Before it, I'd like to show you an illustration of the mid-sagittal section of the brain of the sheep. Here you can see the pituitary gland, where is two small structures. Why it looks like two structures? Because, as I said, it is mid-sagittal section. Here we can see the cerebellum, cerebrum, thalamus, corpus callosum, and other important anatomical structures of the brain. Here we can see the schematic illustration of the hypophysis. Schematic illustration. In this illustration, we can see that hypophysis consists of three main lobes. Here we have adenohypophysis and neurohypophysis. Adenohypophysis and neurohypophysis are separated from each other by intermediate lobe. It's called lobus intermedia. Besides, there's adenohypophysis, which is also called anterior pituitary, and nervous lobe, which is called neurohypophysis. So it shows that hypophysis has really complex and complicated structure. Besides, what I'd like to show you and what I'd like to highlight in this illustration is that neurohypophysis is connected to the hypothalamus. And hypothalamus, also we call the pituitary gland the master gland. Hypothalamus is above the pituitary gland. And although the pituitary gland regulates all the endocrine glands, hypothalamus regulate the function of the hypophysis. Hypophysis and hypothalamus is connected to each other by the portal system. We can see here the portal system. Portal system is made of the nerve fibers, and also it's made of the capillary veins, venous capillaries. What else? I'd like to show you that adenohypophysis has its own group of hormones, while neurohypophysis has its own group, and intermediate lobe has its own hormones. So different lobes produce different hormones. Anterior pituitary is also called the infundibular part. Here there's pars tuberalis. Besides, this is nervous part and infundibulum. Infundibulum is a very thin stalk, and this stalk connects hypothalamus to the hypophysis. So let's continue with the type of the cells which are found in the hypophysis. Based on the histological investigations and histological survey, it was found that in the hypophysis, there are different types of cells which have different ability to stain by dyes. The cells which are stained by the basic dyes are called basophilic. The basophilic cells you can see here. The cells which are stained by the acidic dyes are called acidophilic, and there are different percentage, different proportion of cells in the hypophysis. So there are acidophilic and basophilic cells. Besides, there are cells which are called chromophobes. Why the cells are called chromophobes? Because these cells are not stained by dyes, either whether the basic dyes, or the acidic dyes. Then here we have a very useful illustration of the hypophysis and the connection of the hypophysis with the hypothalamus. So before everything, I'd like to explain you that hypothalamus produce different hormones, different substances by their nuclei. They are supraoptic, paraventricular nuclei, and these nuclei produce such substances like releasing hormones or inhibiting hormones. Releasing hormones activate the function of hypophysis. Releasing hormones, on the contrary, decrease and reduce the function of the hypophysis. So here you can see this connection, the hormones which connect and influence the hypophysis. Let's start with the hormones of the posterior part of the narrow hypophysis. The main hormones of the narrow hypophysis is two main hormones, is oxytocin and vasopressin. I'd like to write the names of these hormones here on the board for you. So here we have oxytocin, one hormone, and vasopressin, the second hormone. Let's start with oxytocin. What is the function of the oxytocin? The main function of the oxytocin is to provide the contraction of the uterus, so uterine contraction. Then the main function is production of the milk and milk ejection. So when vets or when the farmers, they work with the cow, for example, and when they handle the mammary gland, they can easily activate the receptors of this hormone, of the oxytocin. Receptors mainly located on the mammary gland, and mainly the receptors are located on the nipple and on the teeth of the mammary glands. So it's very important to work carefully with the mammary gland, because rude working or careless working with this can cause problems with the production of oxytocin. It can cause peripheral or central problems with the production of the oxytocin. For example, besides, I should also mention that cholinergic fibers, cholinergic innervation can activate the production of the oxytocin, while the adrenergic can decrease the production of oxytocin. And you should remember that any stress when the animal is exposed to the stress, the autonomous nervous system, especially the sympathetic nervous system, can be activated. And if the sympathetic nervous system is activated, the adrenergic system also can be activated, and it can cause reduce of the oxytocin. And the low level of the oxytocin can cause the problems with milk ejection, and can as a result, we can get only the very small amount of the milk. What about the vasopressin? Vasopressin, so if you look at the name, and you will understand that vasopressin has effect on the blood vessels. So it means that this hormone can contract the smooth muscles in the blood vessels and can increase the arterial pressure. But besides, vasopressin has another very important function, which is antidiuretic function, antidiuretic effect. And because of that, vasopressin is also called ADH, so antidiuretic hormone. It is second name synonym, so if you find in literature this ADH, you should understand that it is the same like vasopressin. What is the function of vasopressin? Again, if you look at the name, at the terminology, you should understand that antidiuretic effect means that this hormone provides water retention. Water retention means that this hormone tries to keep the water inside the body and try to increase the level of the water in the body. Okay, okay, please. Okay, Nizami Mehmedov. The posterior pituitary is not glandular as in anterior pituitary. Is it true? Exactly. Thanks for question, Nizami Mehmedov. I'd like to explain this moment. So, sorry. go back. So if we look at the anterior pituitary and if we look at the structure of the adrenal hypophysis and narrow hypophysis, we should know that the narrow hypophysis has absolutely another embryological origin. And so adrenal hypophysis takes its origin from the dorsal pharyngeal roof, while the narrow hypophysis has nervous origin. So the main tissue here is nervous tissue. Besides, so here the question is not glandular. What is the difference? Adrenal hypophysis produces its own hormones. It has cells, somatotrophs, gonadotrophs, and so on, while the narrow hypophysis narrow hypophysis itself does not produce the hormones. The hormones are synthesized in the hypothalamus by the nuclei, by the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei. So it's clear that the hormones which are produced in the hypothalamus are then transported to the narrow hypophysis, and it is the difference. The hormones of the narrow hypophysis from the hypothalamus, where adrenal hypophysis produce its own hormones. Let's continue. What about the hormones of the anterior pituitary? Anterior pituitary has lots of hormones like adrenocorticotropic hormone, growth hormone, steroid stimulating hormone, prolactin, and in the intermediate lobe we have melanocyte stimulating hormones. These hormones, again, you should always pay attention on the name of the hormone. For example, if we talk about steroid stimulating hormone, it means that this hormone activates the steroid. For example, when we talk about adrenocorticotropic hormones, adrenocorticotrope means that this hormone stimulates or reduce the function of the cortex of the adrenal gland. What about the prolactin? Prolactin is mainly written like this. Prolactin generally affects the breast, so mammillary gland, production of the milk, and so here you can see, and also it has effect on the reproduction. It's very important in the reproduction. Okay, let's continue. So here you can see the table which shows the connection between the hypothalamus and between the hypophysis. So here you can see that hormones, releasing hormones or inhibiting hormones, they activate the hormones of the hypophysis, and then they activate their target cells. Their target cells are receptors, which are found in the organs. For example, the receptors of the steroid stimulating hormone is found in the steroid, while the receptors or target cells of the adrenocorticotropic hormones are found in the cortex. Okay, let's continue here. Again, the illustration shows connection between the hormones. I also should mention something about the functions of these hormones. There are lots of hormones in the hypophysis, and sometimes they can be overlapped. What it means? So, based on this overlapping, we can divide the effects into two groups. There can be a synergistic effect in the between these hormones. There can be antagonistic effects and permissive effects. So you should understand that if we talk about the antagonistic effect, it means that two hormones have absolutely opposite functions. When we talk about synergistic effect, they have very similar functions, and one hormone can increase the function of another. What is negative feedback loops? It's a very important mechanism which provides the balance of hormones in the body of animals. So let me explain. So on the top we can see the hypothalamus, then we can see the anterior pituitary, and then we can see an endocrine gland. Hypothalamus produces releasing hormone activate anterior pituitary and then endocrine gland. So if the amount of the hormone is enough in the animal body, this hormone will send negative feedback to the hypothalamus or to the pituitary gland to stop the production. So there's negative long feedback. If it's long loop, it means that the hormone sends the signals immediately to the hypothalamus. There is also can be short negative feedback, short when the tropic hormone sent to the hypothalamus. Negative feedback is very important again to regulate the balance of the hormones in the animal body, to provide the balance of releasing hormones, of trope hormones, as well as the hormones of the endocrine glands. Let's talk about the second gland. Second gland is pineal gland. Why this gland is called pineal gland? Because this gland anatomically looks like a pine cone. The pineal gland, here you can see the location just under the corpus callosum. Here, this gland also relates to the diencephalon. It's also found in the brain. The pineal gland in Latin is called epiphysis, you can see here, or glandula pinealis. The pineal gland is called the biological clock of the animal body. Why it's called the biological clock? Because it produces such hormones like melatonin. There's also serotonin and other hormones, but I'd like to talk more about the melatonin. The melatonin is the hormone which regulates the biological processes in the animal body. So it's a biological clock. The melatonin can be depressed, can be suppressed by the light. So the light, if the light effect on the melatonin, the amount of melatonin decrease, and the level of melatonin become very low in the animal body. Why this fact is very important? So here again you can see the pineal gland on the illustrations. Let me continue. Okay, why it's important to understand the mechanism of the function of the melatonin. So let's talk about the horse and let's talk about the sheep. In the horse and in the sheep, melatonin has absolutely different functions. In the horse, there is anti-gonadotrophic effect. It means that it reduces the functions related to the reproduction, while in the sheep, it has gonadotrophic effect. It's very important in the breeding of animals. So horse has spring breeding. Why the horse has spring breeding? We know that in spring and in summer, days are longer, and it means that the amount of light is also high. And if the amount of light is high, it means the amount of melatonin is very low. And if the amount of melatonin is low, it means that the amount of the anti-gonadotrophic effect absolutely cancelled. So the animals can start breeding. Absolutely, the effect can be observed in the sheep. So here you can see very interesting illustration shows that how light affects the brain and how light affects the function of the endocrine system. So you can have a question that how melatonin can be sensitive to the light. Remember that it goes through the retina, through the eyes. So light, so you know that in the retina we have lots of receptors which are sensitive, photoreceptors, which are sensitive to the light. And when the receptors are activated by the light, this signal can be transferred to the diencephalon, to the pineal gland, and so then all these processes can start. The process related to the activation of the ganglions, then to the reduction of the melatonin, and to activation of production of follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. The next is thyroid gland. The location of thyroid gland is, so here you can see illustrations of different animals, the dog, goat, then there is ox and horse. The location of the thyroid gland is in the close to the larynx. It locates on the ventral part of the trachea, close to the larynx. You can see here, and the name of the thyroid glands in Latin is glandula thyroidea. So these glands in the animals, in the all domestic animals, with exception of the pig, has two lobes. There's right and left lobe. These lobes are connected to each other by the isthmus. You can see here the isthmus which connects two lobes to each other. So the connection of these lobes can be by the connective tissue or it can be glandular. In most animals, this connection is by means of the connective tissue. But here you can see that in the goat there is glandular tissue. Mainly, these glands locate on the both sides of the trachea. In different animals, for example, in the cats, it occupies the first 7 to 10 tracheal rings. In the dogs, it occupies the first 5 to 7 tracheal rings. So the size and the location can be a little bit different in different domestic animals. Thyroid gland, so again, you can see what else I'd like you pay attention is the shape of the glands. For example, in the horse, they have more ovoid shape, while in the ox, it has a little bit pyramidal shape. In the other animals, like in the goat, it's a little bit splintered, and again, ovoid in the duck. So the shape can be, again, different. So this illustration shows how you can find and how you can palpate the thyroid gland, and it shows the location of the thyroid gland. And here you can see the trachea just under the neck, under the mental part of the animal, and here you can see the two thyroid glands. Again, two thyroid glands and parathyroid glands. Thyroid glands and parathyroid glands are closely connected to each other, and they are anatomically very close to each other, and during some surgeries and during operations, the doctors, the vets, should be very careful. For example, if the doctor should remove the thyroid, the doctor should be very careful not to remove the parathyroid glands, because removing of parathyroid glands can cause physiological problems in animals, especially related to the calcium and phosphorus metabolism. Here you can see the schematic illustration of the thyroid glands in different animals. You can see that isthmus is made of connective tissue here. You can see the thyroid gland of the pig. The thyroid gland of the pig has only one lobe. It is a difference. Remember that in all animals there are two lobes which are connected to each other by the isthmus, while in the pig there is only one lobe. The hormones which are produced by the thyroid gland is T3, T4, and calcitonin. T3 is triiodtyronin, T4 is tetraiodtyronin, and T4 is also called thyroxine. Now, let me explain you the effects of these hormones. Generally, the very important element which is necessary for synthesizing these hormones is iodine. Iodium is very important in order to provide the production of these hormones. These hormones, there are mainly two types of the cells in the thyroid, and these hormones are produced in the follicles. So in the follicles, the iod are collected, and they produce the T3 and T4 hormones. They're responsible for different types of metabolism, for growth, for metabolism of carbohydrates, for regulating the temperature level of the body. Beside the follicles, there is also another cells which are called C cells, and these C cells produce calcitonin. Calcitonin is a very important hormone which regulates the level of the calcium and phosphorus in the bone and in the blood. And also remember that this hormone, calcitonin, is antagonistic hormone with parathormone, which is produced by the parathyroid glands. So this parathormone and calcitonin, I'm going to explain the interaction with these two hormones just a little bit later. So here you can see the T4, which is the main secretory product, and T3, triiodtyronin. Okay, so this illustration clearly shows the interaction and connection between the thyroid and parathyroid glands. As I said, thyroid glands produce T3, T4, and calcitonin hormones, while the parathyroid glands produce parathormone. These both glands has one general point. The general point is that these both glands, they regulate the calcium and phosphorus level in the blood, and in the bone. However, these two effects are antagonistic. So look at this illustration, please. So here we can see the level of the calcium in the blood. The normal level is 9 to 11 milligram in 100 milliliters of the blood. If the amount of the calcium, so if we have imbalance in the body, and if the amount of calcium become higher, so the hormone which is activated is calcitonin. Calcitonin become activated and become to take this calcium, take these ions from the blood into the bone. So the main direction of the effect of this hormone is to take the calcium from the blood and send it to the bone. Another situation, if the level of the calcium is low in the blood. In that case, the hormones and the glands which are activated is parathyroid glands, these 4 glands. Parathyroid glands become activated and they produce parad hormone, then parad hormone activate the osteoclasts in the bone. Osteoclasts are the cells of the bone. These osteoclasts have phagocytizing function, and phagocytosis causes the release of calcium to the bone, and as a result we have the balance. So I like to highlight again this moment. Remember, calcitonin tries to take, in the case of imbalance, calcitonin tries to take the calcium from the blood to the bone, while the parad hormone tries to take the calcium from the bone and give this calcium to the blood. So the main goal of these 2 glands, of these 2 hormones, is to create a balance in the body and to provide the normal level of the calcium and the phosphorus. But you should ask, so here you can see again in this illustration the location of the thyroid and parathyroid glands in the dark. Then I'd like to mention again that calcitonin and generally the parathyroid hormone, so parad hormone, cause their effects, so create its effects not only through the bone, but also kidneys and intestines. So when the body tries to keep the calcium, to increase the level of calcium in the body, it increases the absorption of the calcium and decrease the removing of the calcium from the kidneys. However, when the body tries to remove the excessive calcium, it tries to decrease absorption from the intestines and remove the calcium, and try to keep the calcium by the and prevent the removing calcium from the kidneys. Again, here you can see illustration of osteoclasts and osteocytes. So osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Osteoblasts are the cells of the bone which create the new bone tissue, while osteoclasts are the cells which can, roughly it means that they break the bone tissue and try to increase the level of calcium in the blood. So again, you can see this material, and here we have the thyroid gland and parathyroid gland of the sheep. The next is we have here the adrenal gland. What I'd like to explain about adrenal gland. Adrenal gland is another very important endocrine gland which locates on the cranial lateral part of the kidneys. Another name of these glands is suprarenal glands. But remember that although these glands have name suprarenal glands, they are just anatomically located on the kidneys, and they have no physiological connection with the kidneys. So they have absolutely, kidneys and suprarenal glands have absolutely different functions. Let's look at the structure, anatomical structure of the adrenal glands. As kidneys, they have 2 parts. They have cortex, here you can see the cortical part, and the internal part which is called medulla. Inside the adrenal gland there is central vein, and the medulla surround the central vein. Besides, on the middle part there is hilus, like the door of the adrenal glands, which provide the entrance of the blood vessels and nerves, and also this exit of the vessels from the adrenal gland. The adrenal glands have very specific structure, and this specific structure is that this cortical part has radial shape. Because of that, during dissections, so you can easily understand that this is adrenal gland, and you can understand anatomically, you can easily distinguish these two organs. So in the inside we have medulla, so it is the central part, then cortex, and the most outside part of the adrenal gland is surrounded by the fibrous capsule. So there is capsule which covers the adrenal gland. So in different animals, again, we can see some species-specific differences in the pig, ox, duck, so in all domestic animals. So the size and the shape can be different, more triangular shape, for example, and pay attention that the right and left side of the adrenal glands is also different. So the very small in the cat and right part usually has more triangular shape. If we look at the internal structure of the adrenal glands, as I said, there are 2 levels. There's cortex which is the outermost layer, and innermost layer is medulla. So this part is the medulla, and there are three regions which relates to the adrenal gland. So we can divide three regions. The most outer region is glomerular region, then fasciculate, and then reticular. These all four layers. So fascicular, glomerular, reticular, medulla, all of them produce different hormones, and it's very important to have exact knowledge about these hormones and the function of these hormones. Very clear illustration which shows the hormones which is produced by different layers of the adrenal gland. So medulla. Medulla mainly produces catecholamines, so epinephrine and norepinephrine. So adrenaline or noradrenaline, they are synonyms. So epinephrine is the same adrenaline. So this is produced by the medulla, by the medullary part of the adrenal gland. You know that these hormones are responsible, first of all, for the answering the body, for the response of the body to the stress. It also can affect the function of the blood vessels of the heart, the blood pressure, the heart rate, and so on. So it has effect on the cardiovascular system too. And then here we have the cortex part. Cortex part has three layers: the fascicular, glomerular, fascicular, and reticular layer. In Latin, zona fasciculata, zona reticularis, and zona glomerulosa. So it is the Latin names of these layers. Which hormones are produced by these layers? So the outermost layer mainly produce mineral corticoids. Mineral corticoids is aldosterone and corticosterone. Why these hormones are called mineral corticoids? Because mineral corticoids regulate the level and the balance of minerals in the body. Aldosterone, for example, is a very important hormone which regulates the level of the sodium and the water in the body. And generally, this hormone tries to excrete the potassium and keep sodium inside the body, and again provide the water retention. What about the other hormones? The second layer produces glucocorticoids. Glucocorticoids, for example, cortisone. The main function of this hormone is to regulate the metabolism of carbohydrates. And the reticular zone is responsible for the production of the such hormones like androgens for the sex hormones. And here we can see the estrogens and testosterone. And again, I forget about the peptides. Peptides are also produced by the medullary part of the adrenal gland. Again, you can see different zones, and you can see here how the adrenal gland is regulated and by the hypothalamus and by the hypophysis. So here you can see the regulated control zone. For example, adrenocorticotrope hormones. Adrenocorticotrope hormones are produced by the hypophysis. Hypophysis stimulates zona fasciculata and zona reticulata, and they at the same time activate the cortisol and the androgen, testosterone, estradiol, and so on. I'm going to talk about the renin and angiotensin a little bit later. Let's continue with. So here we have again, this illustration shows the function of aldosterone, that it can decrease the natrium and water excretion. So it means that it has effect like keeping the sodium inside the body and excreting the potassium. Before going to hormones of the pancreas, I'd like to talk a little bit about the about some other organs which also have endocrine function. We talked about the parenchymal cells which have endocrine function. We talked about the cells which have like aggregation of cells, for example, in the pancreas, which have again this function. Endocrine function, and also we talk about the endocrine glands. But there is also other type of the cells, like for example kidneys, which for example kidneys don't have kidneys are not endocrine organs, but they have endocrine functions. So the kidneys, the main as endocrine glands, they produce a substance which is called renin. Okay. So here we have this substance, renin. So don't be confused, if in the book or in some textbooks you find any information that kidneys also have endocrine function. This endocrine function is because of some nephrons which have special cells, and these cells produce renin. What is the function of the renin? Again, let's look at the illustration. So here you can see the juxtaglomerular apparatus. What is the juxtaglomerular apparatus? There are different types of nephrons in the kidney. There are basic nephrons which are responsible for the urine production, but there is also there are also some type of nephrons which are responsible not for urine production but for production of hormones. This apparatus is called juxtaglomerular apparatus. Juxtaglomerular apparatus produces renin. So here you can see the substance renin. What does renin do? So there is one substance which is produced in the liver. This substance is called angiotensinogen. Angiotensinogen, by the effect of the renin, can activate AT1, then AT2. The activation of AT2 can activate the adrenal cortex and activate the aldosterone. What will be the result? Result will be the low level of the sodium, the low level of the water. And so here we can see the increased volume of the water in the body, and this can cause the increased arterial pressure. So the function of the renin to regulate blood pressure in the body of animals and in the humans too. It has very similar functions. But of course, in order to finish these all functions, there should be also another substance like angiotensin converting enzyme. It's very important. So I think that students of pharmacology has enough information about this system, because there are lots of medicines which are used to inhibit this angiotensin converting enzyme and to decrease the blood pressure. Let's talk about the pancreas. What I'd like to explain you about the pancreas. As we said, there are two groups of the glands. There are endocrine glands, there are exocrine glands, but there are also some glands which have both functions, which have endocrine and exocrine function as well. So pancreas, testes, ovaries are the example of these glands. This means that pancreas, for example, can work as an endocrine organ and can work as an exocrine organ. As an exocrine organ, pancreas produces pancreatic juice, pancreatic substances, which is important in the digestion, while the pancreas, as aggregation of cells, for example, the Langerhans cells, produce insulin, which are important for regulation of the carbohydrate level in the body. So here we can see this illustration of the pancreas. Here we can see main hormones of the pancreas. The main hormones of the pancreas is insulin and glucagon. Insulin and glucagon also have antagonistic effects. The main function of the insulin is to decrease the level of carbohydrates in the blood. So insulin converts the glucose into the glycogen in the liver, while the glucagon tries, if the level of glucose is low in the body, so this glucagon hormone tries to break the glucagon and increase the level of glucose in the blood. So again, these two hormones also have a little bit antagonistic effect. They have the one main goal is to regulate and to keep in balance the level of glucose in the blood. So pancreas is an example of the mixed gland which has both endocrine and exocrine functions. So here you can see the different cells of the pancreas. Here you can see the delta cells, beta, alpha cells, and beta cells are responsible for the production of the insulin, while the alpha cells are responsible for the production of the glucagon. Before going to another slide, I'd like to little bit give explanation about the two disease. You maybe heard about let me go back. I'm sure that you have heard about such disease like diabetes mellitus and diabetes insipidus. So diabetes is a very common disease, especially in the dogs. And diabetes, what is the difference between these two types, diabetes mellitus and diabetes insipidus? Diabetes mellitus is the most common type of diabetes which you heard, and the main reason, the main cause of this disease is low level, the deficiency of the insulin. Insulin cannot regulate the level of glucose, and the glucose level of glucose becomes higher in the blood. But what is a diabetes insipidus? So here I should write you the hormone which is called antidiuretic hormone. I explained it previously earlier. So two types of diabetes, but two different types of hormones. Diabetes mellitus is responsible for the diabetes mellitus is the disease which is caused by the low level of insulin, while diabetes insipidus is because of low level of vasopressin or antidiuretic hormone. They both have very similar symptoms. One similar symptom is that they produce lots of urine. So lots of urine, but in the diabetes mellitus, there is also glucose in the blood and in the urine, and glucose is the reason of this high level of urine, while when we talk about the antidiuretic hormones, these hormones are responsible for, so the reason of deficiency of this hormone cause the high level of the urine. Then let's talk about the other type of glands, like gonads, which are also mixed glands. They also have exocrine and endocrine function as well. So the main hormones here we can see the estrogens, which are produced by the theca cells of the ovaries, and the androgens, which is produced by the intestinal cells of the testes. I'd like to talk about the hormones which is produced by the luteum corpus. Luteum corpus, is produced after the ovulation and is created after the ovulation, and the corpus luteum produces progesterone. The main function of progesterone is to maintain the pregnancy in animals, and so it's very important. And after the ovulation, progesterone is also produced. So estrogen, progesterone, and androgens are the main hormones of these gonads. We have another classification of the endocrine glands, and this is mainly functional classification. Here I'd like to show you the kinetic hormones, metabolic, morphogenic, and behavioral hormones. What does it mean? For example, when we talk about kinetic, this is epinephrine, this is oxytocin, which mainly, so kinetics means movement. When we talk about the kinetics hormones, it means that they mainly cause the contraction of muscles and some movement, roughly saying. Metabolic hormones like cortisol, for example, the hormone which is responsible for the carbohydrate, generally regulating the balance, the metabolism of substances like carbohydrates, lipids, or proteins. So cortisol, insulin, or steroid hormones are the type of metabolic hormones. Then morphogenic hormones, estrogen, testosterone, the hormones which are responsible for creating some new cells. And the behavioral hormones like testosterone, estrogen, again, they're responsible for the reproductional behavior of animals. At the end of the lecture, I'd like to give little information about the histological, about the microscopic structure of the glands. So here you can see the big classification of the glands. We talked about already endocrine glands and exocrine glands, but there is also unicellular and multicellular glands. What is the difference? Of course, this gland is related to the endocrine too, but I'd like to give more detailed information about that. So what is the difference between the intraepithelial and about extraepithelial cells? When we talk about intraepithelial glands, it means that these glands are embryologically they were developed on the epithelium, and they are stayed in the epithelium, and they function in this epithelium. But when we talk about extraepithelial, they are embryologically, they take origin from the epithelium, but they are, during the development, they change their location and they're connected to the epithelium by the ducts. For example, the glands which are located on the intestinal wall of the intestinal wall or on the gastric wall, they are interepithelial. But salivary glands, pancreas, liver, they are extraepithelial glands. Then if we look at the morphologic classification, we have also simple glands and compound glands. Morphologically, the glands can be, you can see, tubular, they can be alveolar, and can be acinar. So there are three different types of the glands. Mainly the sweet glands, for example, they have tubular shape. Besides, the glands which are tubular, they can be also branched and they can be coiled. And here we can see alveolar glands and acinar glands. Little bit, if I go a little bit back, so here we have compound glands. Why the glands are called compound? When these three types are developed together, so when we have in one gland, when we have both alveolar and acinar, so these glands are called compound glands, because these glands have both morphological structures. They can be tubular and alveolar, they can be acinar and alveolar together. Besides, they can be simple and they can be branched like these glands. What else? We talked already about the unicellular cells, we talked already about the multicellular. Unicellular means that these glands have only one cell, while multicellular, like the endocrine organs or exocrine organs, they have lots of cells in their structure. What else about the classification? Based on the nature of the secretory product, they can be serous, mucus, and seromucous hormones. When the hormone produces the serous substances, so this product will be serous. Mucus, when the main substance of the hormone of the secretion is mucin, so it's called mucus, and there can be mixed type of the hormone of the secrets when there is serous and mucus product at the same time. And the last is about the mode of the release of the exocrine glands. So there can be merocrine, apocrine, holocrine, and cytocrine glands. What is the difference between this mode of secretion? So when we talk about the merocrine gland, it means that the cells produce their secret, but morphologically nothing is changed in this. Nothing will be changed in the structure. In the apocrine cells, during the production, for example, mammillary glands, during the production, the apical part of the cell can be destroyed, but then, of course, it can be rebuilt. And a holocrine gland, when the cell when the glandular cell produce its secret, and this holocrine gland, after the secretion, this gland is totally breaking. For example, is the sebaceous glands. But of course, after some time, this gland can be again recovered. I think that I have finished the information about all glands. I'm waiting for your questions. I will be very glad to answer to your questions. And I'd like to mention that, as I already mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, we have very excellent book in the veterinary anatomy of domestic animals, and all my students have this book. I recommend you to read and to find this information again in this book, in the anatomy of domestic animals. And again, if you have any questions, I will be very glad to answer to these questions. So, don't have. Okay, thanks for your information. Thanks for your attention. See you soon. Goodbye.